All right, good morning, good day, good evening, and welcome to this webinar. I'm Tsui, Professor Emeritus at the Arizona State University, USA, and co-founder of RBM, which is Responsible Research for Business and Management. It is my honor to be a facilitator in this exciting webinar on a topic that's both timely and important, especially for RBM. And clearly, this is a popular topic based on the fact that over 1,000 people have signed up to join this webinar. I don't think we can accommodate that many, but many of you probably on the YouTube. So we have all heard about ChatGPT, which was really sensational when it was first introduced a couple of years ago. And most of us have learned about the term LLM, large language models, and generative AI. We have seen some are already using them in management research. It is certainly a tool that has both promises and challenges. So we have today 3 scholars who are deep into this technology to help us learn about this new exciting tool. So 3 general questions to guide this particular session. First of all, what is it? Each one will explain what they think it is. Second, what have been or are its applications to management research? What are the exciting promises and what are some potential downsides? 3, how can this tool help us to do responsible research, or does it? In what ways it does, and in what ways it does not. So in terms of process, we will begin with Jerry Davis, who will give us a big picture of how generative AI fits into our research ecosystem using examples of Google Scholar. Second, Stella Pachidi will give an overview of LLM, large language models, its applications, and some important considerations. Next, Dirk Lindebaum will talk about ChatGPT in specific and ask the question of how it changes the role of the researcher from that of a knowledge generator to that of a knowledge verifier. Or can the researcher even be able to be a credible verifier if he or she does not engage in research generation activity? So the overarching question that I would like you all to keep in mind as we listen to these 3 presentations is this: how does Gen AI tools contribute to or distract from responsible research, which is defined as scientific activities involved in producing credible or reliable knowledge that's useful in solving the pressing problems of business and society. Okay? So each presenter will have 15 minutes to share their knowledge. Perhaps I invite them to begin with a very brief introduction about yourself. So I will let you decide what you want to tell the audience. And then we'll have 30 minutes for Q&A. Please write your questions in the chat. Brad and other speakers will help in identifying questions of general interest to discuss. We may call on you or we may just read the questions, okay? So finally, we'll have the 3 speakers to give 1 or 2 pieces of advice to those of us who are using or are considering to use this tool. That will be the last 5 minutes of today's session. So with that, I think I will turn the microphone, so to speak, over to Jerry Davis to get us started with his presentation. Does that sound okay?
All right. Thank you so much, Anne. My name is Jerry Davis. I'm a professor of management at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business, and I was editor of a journal called Administrative Science Quarterly for about 5 years as editor-in-chief. And so I'm going to be sharing my perspective on this whole thing as a recovering editor. And what I'm going to try and do is sort of describe the broader context for the arrival of generative AI in research based on my experience as an editor. I'm calling this the algorithmic management of science. It's a bit of a cautionary tale. So what I want to do is set the context by describing how the shift of scientific publication to the World Wide Web put us in a situation of algorithmic management of the science that we do by Google Scholar, and what have been some of the resulting pathologies. And I'm going to argue that GAI is basically growing up, incubating within this particular system that we already had in place. So overview, as we know, publications in scholarly journals are the essential currency for science in our careers. They're not just about sharing ideas and thoughts and findings. They're also a career essential. They don't just convey findings. They're part of our sort of scholarly career ecosystem. I'm going to say something that may not be too controversial, which is that academic publishing houses exist primarily to create profits, not truth. And the advent of the World Wide Web created this explosion of journals, articles, and metrics, which is quite important, as well as a variety of schemes to increase the visibility and profitability of publications. And that's kind of the world where generative AI is incubating. The world that we already had through the World Wide Web creates the context that is generating what generative AI looks like. And I think the early results are kind of predictable within that context. Okay, so the first scientific journal that I'm aware of started in 1665, the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. It was basically letters that scientists sent in. They sort of typeset them and bound them up in a physical, tangible journal. And they're kind of all over the map, a spot in one of the belts of Jupiter, an account of a very odd, monstrous calf. They weren't sort of organized by particular discipline. I'm not sure what the Philosophical Transactions journal impact factor was, but this is what journals looked like. Fast forward 350 years, and now all of the world's journals are in principle accessible through the World Wide Web. All the knowledge in the world is in principle accessible on my phone. And one of the things that the web did was to dramatically reduce the costs of creating and disseminating a journal. So one of the results of this is that there's been a vast proliferation of journals. 25 years ago, there were about 60 journals in management. Now there are 227 listed in the Web of Science, so almost a fourfold increase. It's also led to a vast proliferation of articles. There used to be about 8,000 a year in management. Last year, 27,693 articles. This is a lot. Look at specific journals. Back in the day, when I was the editor of a journal, they were limited to how much they could publish by the physical space of the journal. So the number of articles published in Administrative Science Quarterly, which came out quarterly, was about 24, 6 articles per issue. Journal of Business Ethics, same year, 269 articles, so an order of magnitude larger. But a truly web-based journal can be limitless. So there's a journal, not a management journal, but a scholarly journal indexed by the Web of Science called Sustainability. The number of articles they published in 2022, 16,896. So 2 orders of magnitude bigger than the Journal of Business Ethics. This is an astounding number of publications out there. So good news for doctoral students, you will publish your dissertation. Don't be too worried about being able to publish. It's not that hard these days. So with 30,000 articles published every year in 200 plus journals, how do I know what is worth reading? And you might say, well, I'm only going to focus on the most impactful journal. So you might look at something like the Journal Impact Factor. Here are the top 10 journals in management in 1997. It's a fairly familiar looking list: Administrative Science Quarterly, Academy of Management Review, Academy of Management Journal, Harvard Business Review. Fairly familiar looking set of quasi-academic journals. 25 years later, only 2 journals are left from that original top 10 list, which is AMR and Harvard Business Review. All of the rest are new to the top 10 list, and some of them are really new to the world. So the number 2 journal in management, based on its astounding impact factor, is the Journal of Innovation and Knowledge. And this was first published in 2016. So a 6-year-old journal is now the second most impactful journal in management. That's disruption. That's like a Clay Christensen thing right there, that if you're a really great journal, you can burst your way in and make it to the top fairly quickly. I dug a bit. It's interesting where the sites come from, but we'll leave that for another talk. So, how do we as scholars navigate all of this bounty? These days, scholars only find articles online. They are intermediated by the web. The relevant unit of analysis for thinking about the literature is the article, not the issue or even the journal itself. And to be cited, it helps to be read. And to be read, it's absolutely essential to be discoverable through Google Scholar. Hail Dark Lord. There's only one organization that had the capacity, it seems, to organize the world's information, and that was Google. When Google Scholar came out in 2014, they only had two folks working on this. So it was very much a side hustle for the Google Corporation. 2 years later, they added citation counts to Google Scholar. And in 2011, they added scholar profiles where individual scholars could put together a kind of page showing all of their citations and then a bunch of metrics like H-index and total citation counts by year and so on. And now Google Scholar is the sun around which the scholarly planets orbit, something that is essentially an inconsequential side hustle for a big tech monopoly is now our indispensable guide. And I hate to say this out loud, but every tenure case, someone's going to allude to Google Scholar. Some job applications require your Google Scholar entry. Google Scholar has become this incredibly central metric in how we do the science that we do. So if you are a scholar, you probably have a page that looks something like this with your happy face and a bunch of impressive numbers. And this is going to be used as a metric to evaluate your worth as a scholar. This inconsequential side hustle that doesn't generate revenue for the Google Corporation. And in some sense, what are the core values of science and how do they align with something like Google Scholar? They're doing something helpful. They're sort of organizing information on the web. But the consequence of creating these metrics, I think, could be problematic. We think of transparency as one of the core values of science. And yet, if you go to Google Scholar and say, how exactly are documents ranked? Why do they come out in the order that they do? Because we know no one's going to go past page 3 when doing a literature search. It says Google Scholar aims to rank documents the way researchers do, weighing the full text of each document, where it was published, who it was written by, as well as how often and how recently it's been cited. They don't really tell you, and they're not going to answer if you give them a phone call. We don't really know why things turn up in the order that they do. I searched on corporate governance randomly and was delighted to see myself in there as the number 4 thing, which is insane because there are vastly more cited and important works out there. But for some reason, I turned up pretty high on this. Number 1 and 2 are textbooks. Why are these the top things for corporate governance? So this is, I think, troubling because Google Scholar has become the universal entry point for literature searches. When someone wants to know what does the scientific literature say on topic X, certainly our doctoral students, they're going to go to Google Scholar. That is going to be their method to know what's been published. And if they don't make it past the first 3 pages, that can be potentially, I think, quite problematic. Now, there used to be a competitor called Microsoft Academic. So Google wasn't a complete monopoly here. Microsoft Academic I found to be incredibly well run and thoughtful and had all kinds of great features. But as a web page notes, they retired at the end of 2021. And so Google Scholar's only real competitor has dropped out of the game. There's really only one source for valuing academic work. And I think what's happened because of this is that scholars are now like vendors on Amazon fighting for the attention of knowledge consumers. I went to search for solar eclipse classes and got 610 results. I'm not going to get off the first page here, but in some sense, trying to get your research onto the front page, you're a lot like the folks that are selling these products, trying to get their works onto the front page. In some sense, if you want to be found by Google Scholar, you need to be cagey about things like search engine optimization. Spider-Man's Uncle Ben might have said, with bad metrics comes great irresponsibility. If the metrics you have are less than perfect, some bad things can happen. For authors, we've seen paper mills that will write articles on your behalf. We've seen scholarly fraud, too much to mention, so I won't mention it. There's even citations for pay, which I'll point you to in a moment here. For journals and their editors, they're working on things like search engine optimization engineering or citation cartels to bump up their journal's impact factor. I won't go into that more, but believe it happens. And then for publishing houses, whose names I will not mention, there's been a needless proliferation of journals out there. There's excessive open access fees. Some of them have cascading submissions. They tell editors, well, if it's not good enough for your journal, make sure that the article gets reviewed to another journal published by our same publishing house to make sure that it stays within our domain. And then there's also cross-journal coercive citations to make sure that journals published by that house end up emptying their own balloon. This is kind of fun. I found this recently on on Fiverr. I will increase and boost citations and H-index on Google Scholar. So they are promising for $100 to boost your Google Scholar count by 20 citations. And I guess if you're going up for tenure in the next 3 months, you might be willing to spend a few $1,000s to boost your citations. But this is kind of predictable given the ecosystem of publishing that we live in now. Journals. We have seen a raft of journal editorial boards quitting en masse because they're being forced to emphasize quantity over quality. In fact, you can go to Retraction Watch and they've got a list of 8 journals in 2023 alone where they all the editors abandoned the journal because they no longer thought that it was doing quality work. Now add generative AI. What happens within this ecosystem that I've described when you have the tool like ChatGPT? So I don't think you need to be Nostradamus to see where this is going to go. What are going to be some of the shenanigans that happen because of generative AI? So there's a fun plugin on the Chrome Web Store that provides instant journal quality checks. So you do your search, and then a little balloon will pop up telling you the journal's impact factor, H-index, and things like that. Wild. You don't need to drill down on that article because you've got an add-in that will tell you whether the journal's good or not. You can do GAI-enabled literature reviews. Consensus is a fun one, but there's many competing products out there that are essentially doing literature reviews. If you have a finding that you can't explain and you don't care about good science, you can do a confirmation bias-driven literature search. I got a finding. Find me some literature that makes a plausible hypothesis that would have predicted this. Do not do this. I'm being very clear. Don't do this. But the tools are pretty easy and, not so hard to do. We've already seen instances of publications with GAI-assisted authorship. There was some fun things going viral on Twitter last week. For example, this article, opening sentence, certainly, here's a possible introduction for your topic. If you've used ChatGPT, you know that it starts off with certainly, comma, then gives you the results in an actual journal publication that you can find on the web. Others have gone searching for it. You can go to Google Scholar and search for the term certainly, comma, here is, and you will see a surprising number of academic publications that are using this horrifying introduction. Then there's GAI peer reviews. So some folks have recently published an article looking at AI-modified AI conference submissions and found that something like between 6.5 and 16.9% of the text submitted as peer reviews could have been substantially modified by LLMs. They used terms like commendable, meticulous, and intricate that humans don't use, but GAI does a lot. So the full cycle is now being, in some sense, polluted by GAI. What I think I'm most worried about next in my last 10 seconds here is that GAI is very good at SEO hijacking. I know this is a nerd term and we'll have to correspond later about this, but it's not going to be difficult to create entire replicas of journals using ChatGPT that you'll be able to post complete journal article looking things and steal the SEO for those journals and those articles and we won't really know what's real. I am surrounded by a bunch of physical copies of a journal. I can pull it off the shelf and see what's there really. But imagine that editors act like DoorDash and create replica versions of journals, but alter them in some way. It is possible, and I'm not going to be too shocked by it. What now? Stay tuned. I'm writing an article with Beth Fetchke that will be coming out in the months ahead on this topic, but thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, Jerry, so much for staying within your 15 minutes. You're actually ahead by 1 minute. Great job. So I'm sure you have lots of questions, so please write it down on the chat box. And then now we're going to call upon Stella. Please, we're going to entertain questions afterwards, Ash. Is that okay? Yeah, okay. So, Stella, are you ready?
Hi, yes, thanks. Can everybody see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. So my name is Stella Pachidi. I'm assistant professor in information systems at Cambridge Business School, and I'm very interested in how emerging technologies are shaping the nature of work. I've been doing research around more broadly algorithmic technologies, more recently technologies under the AI umbrella. So that's I'm giving this introduction just so that I help people understand a little bit where I'm coming from, and maybe in that sense I should mention my first degree was computer engineering. So I am one of those folks who are gonna say, well, AI is not new to that, because of course the domain has been evolving. But I think, from an organizational perspective, it's really interesting to see how it is now that those technologies, one way or another, they are shaping work, and there's a knowledge work specifically in the production of knowledge. And we already see interesting studies on how AI is shaping productivity in different knowledge work domains like customer service, consulting work, lawyers' work. And I think that's interesting in the sense that we actually see the pressure, the tendency basically to implement those tools, if not to automate tasks, at the very least to support some of those. And along with the introduction of AI in knowledge work comes the question of expertise. So in several domains, there is what I call a contestation of expertise, what it means to be an expert in a knowledge work domain nowadays. So interestingly, we've seen GPT-4 passing the bar exam and beating more than 90% of the people that took the exam, doing great at the biology Olympiad, of course, beating 99% of the humans that took the GRE verbal and so forth. And again, I think it's interesting to look at how that how those views about the AI expert basically are shaping knowledge work pragmatically, with several companies firing people, laying off people, and suggesting that, well, we don't need that many in that area anymore because we do have tools to automate a lot of the work. And as I started saying already, this has an impact on the production of knowledge. I'm currently involved in a research project on the changing regime of knowing in Wikipedia, how that is being transformed, or at least how it is about to be disrupted by ChatGPT in particular. And interestingly, I think, we've, as a scholar of technology organizations, I've been looking at the transformation of work in several areas. Now, apparently, is the time to be concerned about the transformation of our own work as academics. And that's something that several top journals in like Science and Nature, but also journals in our field like AMJ recently, information systems research as well in the IS field, they've been concerned with about what do all those tools mean about how we produce academic knowledge. And within that context, I would like to share with you some of my views. Some of those I've already written and published in an interesting curated discussion on Journal of Management Inquiry, together with other scholars, including Dirk, who will present after me. So I think, I mentioned that I have a sufficiently good understanding of the technology, not a deep understanding of the technology, but I think that's important to if we want to understand how those tools are going to shape our work, we need to understand where they're coming from, how they are developed, because that shapes our view of what we can or what we cannot do with them. So in that sense, my view is that to fully understand what large language models are doing and how they may shape the production of academic knowledge, and specifically of knowledge about management and organizations, I think we need to take a step back and look at how they're designed and look at how they're implemented as well. So any kind of tool, where is it coming from? Based on what data has it been trained, or has it been fine-tuned eventually? Who was involved in that development? Where are those people coming from? What kind of views are they bringing? So I think we need a more holistic view. And we don't have time to go into the details right now, but I think it's at the very least, it's important to look at how ChatGPT in particular got developed and evolved. And this is a complicated, this is a complicated, large diagram that you can find on OpenAI's website. I think that they have it on academic paper as well, but you can just literally find it on OpenAI's website. But it's interesting, obviously, they started from obviously a training data set. We have some information about where this data set came from. We know quite a bit of that was obviously, scraping public web, including several Wikipedia articles as well. And initially, that data set basically it was labeled by human labelers. Not a very large number. Interestingly, as well, we had a conversation with Dirk last week, and he mentioned that in one of the papers where they actually described this process, they mentioned 40 labelers, at least for I think the 3.5 version. Which is interesting. And then basically those labelers, those humans who come with their own biases, with their own views about knowledge, etc., right? It's important to take into consideration where those people are coming from. They did an initial labeling, which basically trained the model how to review itself in an automatic way. There's been a lot of interesting aspects about how those models work and their shortcomings, including hallucinations, for example. Another interesting aspect, which I recently read about, is this phenomenon that is named model collapse, which is what I find relatively scary when I'm thinking about not what the tools can do right now, but what is going to happen to those tools in the future, where the idea is obviously that, right now already a lot of the text that is produced, including academic text, as Jerry just showed us, is shaped by Gen AI tools. And what this phenomenon, the model collapse phenomenon, shows is that actually there is a degenerative process that's happening with those models, where basically they start producing more and more homogeneous responses, and they start missing out the tails, basically, of the distribution, the less common, however, potentially important parts of the data. And practically what this says is that if we continue using models that are trained by publicly available data, which are increasingly data shaped by Gen AI, those tools are basically becoming measurable worse. That's what this research is showing us. And now I would like to, I have obviously a far from exhaustive list of potential ways where I think, the debate seems to be going around where we as management scholars could be using generative AI tools. One is, of course, including reviewing literature. So obviously, anybody can go to ChatGPT, either the free version or the paid version. And I must say, a lot of times I ask it myself questions, and I'm surprised by the amount of detail it brings. But so there is the lure out there. There's specific tools which so far they seem to be relatively weak in at least bringing the more popular IE, well, not necessarily IE, but at least exclusive journals. But I'm sure they're going to overcome that barrier eventually. So the potential is there, basically, to use the tools to very, very quickly get acquainted with the literature. Now, where I would challenge that is, to me, those tools, no matter how effective they may be at summarizing texts, at responding to our hopefully sophisticated prompts, they're not socialized in the academic conversations, right? To immerse yourself in an academic conversation, it means to socialize in it. And when I mean socialize is, I mean be guided by your supervisor, participate in workshops, conferences where you do not just read some text, but there is the history behind the text, behind how the paper was produced, why certain ideas were shaped in such a way, potentially through the review process, right? There is all this social history of the paper that I don't think LLMs will necessarily ever be able to bring along, because this is just something tacit, right? That we develop by socializing ourselves. Of course, one could argue that we can very effectively use large language models to support our writing. I'm not sure for how long our institutions are going to support funding for copy editing when they say, well, ChatGPT can do it for free for you. I am, however, a little bit worried, and I must say, not being a fluent, a native English speaker, right? Sometimes I do want to check ChatGPT about have I written this properly or not. But then I worry, like, could it be that the more reliant we become, the more we are losing our own voice, our own style of writing, right? Right now, you can go and ask ChatGPT. Well, I'm not sure there is a Professor Pachidi's style of writing. I'm pretty sure there is, however, a Professor Davis's style of writing. And quite likely, ChatGPT would be good at replicating that. But what does that mean for the future voices, for the voices of our future generations? Will the increasing reliance on those tools allow us to have those voices? And of course, the question is, do we want to have those voices? Maybe we don't. I hope we do. But that is another thing, I guess, to consider. Then we could look at, using Gen AI for data collection, right? Very practically, you can easily just use those tools to scrape a lot of information. You can get a lot of unstructured text and say, well, can you identify those categories? Can you extract interesting variables? Can you pre-process potential interactions that have taken place in social media, in email conversations, you name it? And again, that could be, of course, highly efficient, very time-saving thing to do by using those tools. But at the same time, let's not forget that those tools, what I suggested earlier, right? They come with performative implications. They have embedded, sorry, that's my dog. They have embedded ontological orientations in them. And at the very least, they do not have the researchers' ontological orientations, right? When we immerse ourselves in data collection, we bring our own ontological and epistemological lenses in them, right? So the model is going to make agential cuts practically, which are quite likely to be different from the agential cuts that the human researcher would have made. And what makes things even more complicated is obviously that the way in which the model makes those adjustable cuts is invisible to us, right? Because the workings of the model are invisible. We don't necessarily know exactly how it has been pre-trained based on what data, how it was fine-tuned, even if we assume that fine-tuning is, obviously definitely a better version than a publicly available version. But those inner workings matter for how the models are going to render topics, variables, or sentiments visible or less visible. Then, of course, who wouldn't want to use those tools to analyze data? There is so much data available nowadays, which is, for qualitative researchers, it's definitely a lure. There's a lot you can find out there, and you could supposedly very quickly analyze with tools. At the very least, you could get acquainted with a newer method faster, because you can use the tool to give you even a script that you could potentially run. So again, time saving. Wow, that sounds really exciting, I guess, for the heads of our institutions who have to approve our budgets and so forth. But what I'm worried about is, where is the researcher's situated knowledge? Where is the experience? For me, being a qualitative researcher, I immerse myself in the field. I analyze the data, having shaped certain views already, because I have been there. I have the lived experiences. I have talked to those interviewers, and those tacit understandings, tacit impressions that I have shaped are going to affect how I'm going to look at the data. And this interpretation is not captured anywhere, because it's in my lived embodied experience, having been the person collecting the data. Where I think it might be useful when it comes to data analysis, potentially, I guess, could be by using what is probably more up and coming. We don't necessarily see it yet with the tools, but that's called in-context learning, where basically it's a one step further than what we call fine-tuning, where basically the researcher can train contextually the tool based on their own data. And that could be a way where I could say, well, I have already decided I'm using these. I've already shaped my coding scheme, for example, to a large extent, but I'm just looking for additional evidence. Can I have another 2 or 3 quotes that reflect what I have just found? Potentially, that might be time saving, I guess, by using an LLM. Personally, I am worried when I already hear colleagues who are saying that they are using it to already shape the first coding scheme. Before closing, there's a few final things I would like to summarize / consider. I mentioned a little bit inherent biases, and that's something quite concerning. I don't know how many of you will recognize this image. This is Microsoft Tay, the chatbot by Microsoft that had been launched on Twitter in 2016. They had to take it down within a few hours of operation because the users were trolling with it, and they were feeding it with sexist and racist comments. And that obviously, that was quite a few years ago, but we're far from resolving the biases issues. We just see patches on the tools. Let's not kid ourselves. The same with hallucinations. And personally, I like following Gary Marcus I like his views. I think I believe him when he says that the hallucinations is something that is not easily resolvable when it comes to LLMs. And I agree with that. And there's the deepfakes aspect when it comes to research. I think that's something to really worry about, much more obviously than finding one sentence of certainly here is an interesting introduction, etc. Right? It's to the extent where it's informing how we produce research and how we make our research relevant to organizations and managers. The black box performance, we are not experts in those tools. We're trying to understand them more, and we should try and understand them more. But ultimately, even the very developers, they do not fully have they cannot fully promise us and provide transparency and explainability. Path dependencies, as I said, could we be risking of just multiplying the same types of topics, the same types of findings, the same types of voices in our writings? And finally, changing valuation schemes, because the lure is there, as I said, and I am concerned what the future will be about how we are evaluated as academics, how we are funded on an individual basis, on a departmental basis, on a university basis, eventually. But there's so much excitement about this increased productivity that I am concerned about what that might mean in terms of pressure on the researcher and how that might affect the quality of our research. And I will end it there. Thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you, Stella, very much. That was such a rich set of ideas. Well, really overwhelming. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and ask Dirk to give us his presentation, which is equally provocative.
Yeah, we've done this now a million times, and we still stumble over the little technical issues. So a very good afternoon, good morning, good night to everybody, wherever you are. My name is Dirk Lindebaum. I'm a senior professor in management at Grenoble Ecole in Management in France, and also a visiting professor at Alberta School of Business. And alongside all this writing and reading, I also have the pleasure to edit a journal that is very close to my heart, the Academy of Management, Learning and Education. So I'm really, really pleased to be here today. I'm very thankful to Ibret and my colleagues for organizing this event. The paper that I'm presenting, or the talk that I'm presenting today, is basically based on an essay that is now online already in the British Journal of Management. And it's been written with Peter Fleming from Sydney. Okay, so without further ado, I should go into the topic. No, actually, I thought of Jerry's talk, and I thought, should I start the conversation with saying certainly? But I skipped that idea for the sake of a more authentic presentation. Now, I found that the preceding conversations really, really stimulating, and they prompted me actually to clarify something before I start. The first point is really that science is not a monolithic exercise. We have a number of paradigms that have all unique purposes and functions, and depending on what kind of paradigm you're looking at, you might detect certain uses or other risk or more risky applications if you consider it through the lens of a different paradigm. The second point that occurred to me when I listened to these great conversations before is really we are not dealing here with a case of technological determinism. We're really dealing fundamentally with a value preference that we as a community of practice have. So who decides that this should be, that productivity and efficiency should be the main values that inform our work? And in order to put things that are to come now into context, the way you should look at this conversation is really that from ontological position that knowledge is a social and personal accomplishment, which resonates with what Stella said already before. But I thought I clarified this. Okay, so I don't have a very long presentation. I hope you can hang in there. I basically have two questions that I want to go through. The first one is, what is ChatGPT, how it is designed? When we had a preliminary talk about this event today, it turns out that Stella and I had the same slide about where she used the heading subjectivity. So I decided to take it out for a more parsimonious presentation. But I think she has a really significant point to make. We need to understand how the technology is designed, how it is put together to assess the outputs that it generates. And for us then to be very mindful about these outputs and put them into context. And the second one I want to dwell on in more detail is really the question, why from a perspective of a social ontology, why does ChatGPT produce poor knowledge? Chances are that some of you might find some of the points a little bit more provocative, but that is also a little bit by design, certainly. Okay, so what is ChatGPT and how it's designed? But basically, it's a state of the large language model. It's basically trained to predict the likelihood of a token, a character, or word, given its preceding context or its surrounding context. So when it means surrounding context, what it really meant is looking for clusters like king, queen, man, woman. Essentially, these large language models operate through the statistical substructure of the English language or of language generally speaking. But what is really, really important, and what not a lot of people are aware of, in my opinion, is that there have these safety railguards, what's called a reasonable continuation of a preceding text. So if you have a structure, a syntactical structure emerging, the assumption of a reasonable continuation means there are guardrails around how much the sentence might deviate or might veer to the extreme side, an outlier. So a reasonable continuation. I'll come back to that point later. All right, okay. So why does ChatGPT produce poor knowledge? Again, poor knowledge in the sense of me as somebody who's believing in the social construction of knowledge. It's really the idea that when we observe the social world, we can see sometimes that our reflexivity is activated. It's activated when we problematize the world we're living in, particularly when we start to interrogate the taken for granted experience and we question the relationships with our social knowledge. Think, for instance, cases of positive deviance, defined as departing from social norms in honorable ways. That is happening, for instance, when we depart from a social norm, a social convention. We do so in honorable ways, and we do it because it is the right thing to do. The work that I've done on moral anger, for instance, I would place that in that context. Second one, and based on that, ChatGPT is actually blind to the personal, social, and cultural circumstances that we inhabit. So again, this goes back to the idea that knowledge production is a social accomplishment. And when I say it's blind to the personal and social cultural circumstances, what I really have in mind here is a lack of sensitivity when, for instance, the meaning of a concept or construct changes as the values around the concept or construct change. So what ChatGPT is very good at is to capture, to freeze in space and time a particular meaning. But when it comes to inductive research, qualitative research, actually understanding the emergence of new phenomena or how the changing of a term modifies over time, that's where I see a big deficiency. So, and in this essay that I mentioned before, we make reference to high probability choices within the confines of training data. So that's really, really important because the training data has dominant patterns and ChatGPT will reproduce these for better or worse. But what this means is that, and I can show you on the next slide, it's an illustration of this really. If you think about the black boxes as the confines of the training data, you will find dominant patterns, dominant views in the training data. And we try to illustrate that with by using these fat black lines and dots. So that's a dominant pattern in the training data. But then also you have patterns that are less visible, but from a kind of all-rounded social science perspective, the fringe views, the views on the margins, they may still hold significant insight. Only because they are not mainstream doesn't make them, from a scientific perspective, having no merit. On the right, you can see the same graph, but what we wanted to say is really you can think outside the box, and that's what the gray line is all about. So there's an opportunity for low probability choices. And for me, that resonates not very naturally as somebody interested in normative and research, normative social science research, to really operate on the fringes. But we can also step outside the training data in the Kantian sense of a priori knowledge, the knowledge that happens irrespective and independent of direct experience before. So there's a lot of intellectual playground to be explored when we try to step outside the confines of the training data. All right, so why does ChatGPT produce poor knowledge? And I want to dwell on this for a little bit. In the essay with Peter Fleming, we identify 4 factors that I think are worth unpacking here. The first one is appearance and reality. ChatGPT cannot discriminate between truth and falsity, and it cannot synthesize the data in ways that stand outside itself. Now, what does it mean? It means, on the one hand, this is, yes, related to the point that we heard before around hallucinations. But there's something else to it. And here the work of Brian Cantwell-Smith and his MIT book on the promises and peril on AI is really, really relevant, where he makes the reference to what he calls the failure of artificial intelligence to engage in object comprehension. Now, what does object comprehension mean? It means that the technology is unable to understand what is the case about the object, what is not the case about them, but could be, and what cannot be the case about them to begin with. Think about irony, for instance, its inability to capture irony. Irony is basically meaning to say something, but to mean something very, very different. Right, so the next point would be contextuality. ChatGPT is an acontextual linguistic algorithm really focused on universal calculability and not concrete understanding of a situation. And here you can see the parallel with what Stella so eloquently portrayed before. If I want to understand a particular situation, understanding really means as a psychological ring where I try to recreate the lived experience of people that I'm investigating as a social science researcher. And that context emphasis is difficult, if not impossible, to capture with the use of ChatGPT. Third, the transcendental grammar. Human comprehension permits us to step outside of our own internal representations, which gives language its generative capabilities. And here I see a really compelling parallel again with the reference that Stella made before to what she called model collapse. As these models progress and feast on or are fed on their own recursive data, the quality of the models actually decline. But we as humans, we have generative capabilities to come up with something new. So in relation to the fourth point, commitment and responsibility, ChatGPT is completely indifferent to what is right and what is wrong, nor does that distinction matter to it to begin with. It matters, however, to humans who are, for instance, at the receiving end of the decisions or outputs generated by ChatGPT, and these decisions are actually manifesting themselves in the physical, the social sphere. And Stella used the stochastic parrot before, the stochastic parrot paper by Emily Bender before, and I actually will use that as well in this piece as well. So, given these features, I would offer the claim that it cannot distinguish word form from meaning. That's really, really important. It operates on statistical probabilities. Given that A was the first word in the sentence, what is the likelihood of B being the next one? But this is very, very different from us understanding meaning and context of a single word, of a set of words in a particular cultural context. So, and I talked about the harmful consequences of these large language models, and here is one very strong quote that supports this. That these language models reflect stereotypical and derogatory associations along gender, race, ethnicity, and disability status due to biases in the training data. We mentioned and we heard before that these are liable to hallucinate. The other point that I want to underline really, really affirmatively is that I hear a lot of people saying that we can use ChatGPT to create innovative, imaginative, original scholarship, and I would really beg to differ here, because in the end, it's unable to accommodate our ability for radical changes in perceptions and understanding that we can experience, for instance, in these kind of Eureka-style insights. And it can't do that. And here I go back to what I said before, to this assumption of the reasonable continuation design that's inbuilt. We see a lot of safe papers. We may see fewer bold papers. And also Stella referred to that before, due to the high probability choices that the technology produces, given that it's confined by training data, for me, there's a real risk of theoretical homogeneity, whereas original and creative work really relies on the low probability choices that we make. The final thought before I end bang on time really is, it's a valid question, but I think it's important that we as a community of scholars entertain this. How comfortable should we, when our roles are set to shift from knowledge production to knowledge verification, oversight, and translation? How can we set to be knowledge verifiers if we don't produce knowledge ourselves anymore? And I'm reminded here, my dad is a master carpenter, and he's now assessing the work of apprentices in carpentry. He can only do that because he's done this before. So, on that note, I would like to stop. Some of you may feel a little bit like Tom now, raising questions, scratching their heads. And that's fine. That's the idea of this event. And I would like to thank you for your attention. And I would hand over now to Anne. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dirk, very much. Thanks, Beth. Yeah, I'd like to have full screen for everyone. Wow, there's just amazing set of information. I see that conversation in the chat has been very, very active, and lots of great ideas, suggestions, and some really very important questions. So let's transition into Q&A. I've been able to capture a few questions, and I'll start with a set of questions that has been that's been on my mind quite a bit since we decided to organize this webinar. And the question has to do with what Dirk talked about at the end of the presentation, the role of the researcher. That is our role going forward, assuming that this set of tools is going to be on the rise and we can run away with it. It's going to be playing an important role in our field of social science research, in management, in business, or in many other fields as well. So what is our role in this whole endeavor? So the question I have, hopefully captures many of your questions as well, is the following. I guess there are two related questions. Okay, first is the meaning of original scholarship. You know, we talk about when I was up for tenure, very important that I do original research. I'm the first author on original research, that the idea is my own and captures new phenomena and so forth. And we're supposed to create new knowledge in management. So this meaning of original scholarship, what does it mean when we are in a context of widespread use of LLMs and other tools like chatbots and many others that other people have mentioned? So that's our role of scholarship. And also in the second one, and then let the panelists react to both questions, if we choose whichever one they like. And that is also mentioned by many of you as well. How do we ensure that new generation of management scholars that get trained while surrounded by Gen AI-based tools to develop the skills and expertise needed to conduct responsible research? In other words, how can we be knowledge verifiers if we don't produce knowledge anymore? Or should we continue to produce knowledge and try to think about ways to use generative AI in a way that does not deprive us of our originality in our thinking, in our knowledge of the context, and so forth? So these are two general questions. One is the role of researchers, second is training of new researchers. So anybody want to take up either one of those two questions?
And it's the idea that do you want us to respond first or bring in the audience?
Oh, I think you should. You're the experts now. I mean, there are many experts in the audience too, but I think we'll start with you, and then anybody want to chime in, that'd be great.
All right. Jerry, Stella, anybody, anything burning on that tongue?
You first, Dirk. I have thoughts, but I
Okay.
think you should go first.
Okay, thank you. And these are extremely relevant and important questions. I try to be brief. What is our role? That's a great question. The answer to it will be a reflection on the value preferences that we have as individuals and as a community of scholars. Do I want my research outputs be driven by a productivity frenzy? No, I don't want it. I want as a concerned social scientist, I see my role as observing what's happening in the world, stumbling over theoretical conundrum and puzzle, and try to make sense of it. Try to understand it better, so that through quality social science research, we can return the fruits of our work to society and make it a better place to live. I know that some people now use ChatGPT as a thought-generating tool. Instead of connecting with the real world, gaining the inspiration for the research in the real world, because there are some problems that require resolving, it's just being a journal technician. I want to write a nice paper in a fancy journal. Give me an initial idea. So there's already a disconnection taking place here between the social scientist contact with reality and the way we start to work. The meaning of original scholarship, I think I would hope my talk has answered that question. How do we ensure that future generations of scholars can advance in light of ChatGPT? Again, for me, in a way that is the answer to that will depend on the conversation that we have as a community of scholars about what and which values matter for us. If we superimpose values of efficiency and productivity on everything else, we might just as well quit. We might just as well leave the field to OpenAI, Microsoft, Uber, and all these big tech companies who are increasingly conducting social science research. Thank you. Certainly.
Thank you, Dirk. Thank you, Dirk. Sarah, you have your...
I'm happy to follow from Dirk, and I'm not sure I have the right question, but I think a lot of the why we do what we do on in our work as management researchers, and I think it's associated with the values and our feeling of responsibility. Is we do it because we're passionate about it, right? I think anyone who has decided that they want to be an academic, they want to do it mainly because they're just driven by passion, because they want to resolve problems. So in that sense, I don't necessarily want to sound resistant to change, but I want to believe that we will continue producing knowledge, and we will protect the activities, the meaningful activities and experiences through which we do that, right? Because we do that by in an experiential way, basically. And I think there's a lot that the tools can offer, and the tools, in some ways they may not become. We may not be able to resolve all their issues. They will become better one way or another. Maybe not perfect, but they will become better. But I think that what we bring through passion and through tacit knowledge, through this engagement that is associated with the values that we see in this work, I think that's that cannot be replicated and captured by tools. And to answer the question about training the new generations, I think that this is really fundamental, including them in projects where they can appreciate and understand the practicalities. Just to put it very bluntly, like the understanding the manual way, right? Of course, there's, they have to figure out how you get, how you get your hands dirty doing the job, basically, even if eventually you use tools, but understanding what it takes and being able to develop that kind of mindset of evaluating, I think that's important, and allowing them in a way to feel inspired by this so that they can continue doing it in a very personalized, in a very social way. A lot of the work that we do is we invest ourselves in it, and I think that this is very, very important to continue doing. So yeah, so I think we have to be producers. We have to continue being producers and not just evaluators.
Okay, thank you, Stella. Yeah, your answer reminded me of the Principles of Responsible Research. RBM has a position paper, outlines 7 principles. And the basic idea is that one of the most important requirements that the researcher chooses the topic to study that's important to the world. And the second is the researcher engages the phenomena, knows the context really well, and engage the people being researched, the organization being researched, to understand the context. Therefore, your research is not only contextualized, but also closer to the quote truth. Because, with AI being a box, a set of data that's pre-existing for a long time, that is context-free, that might get some kind of research problems, but not all research problems. A lot of research is contextual. So, and responsible research means that you have to engage the context and the people in it to help you do good research. Okay, so Jerry, you want to give it a try? You want to pass it on?
No, I would love to dive in and say some stuff that I probably will regret, but I just want to get it out there, because where else are we going to have these controversial conversations? So it feels like there's part of the underlying question is, well, why is it that we do what we do? Like, what is the point of doing science in the first place? And one answer would be our career concerns. This is the job I found myself in, and I want to do fun stuff. And I like reading fun articles rather than boring articles. And I like cool metaphors rather than dull metaphors. And I just love the life of being a college professor. I want to make a living doing this. And so how do I keep doing it? By publishing papers. So if career concerns are the top issue, then I guess the problem to be solved is we don't have enough articles out there. And I want to be able to publish more of them. I kind of feel like we have all the articles we could possibly, we are not suffering from a drought of articles. Everyone can publish if they want. Everyone can get their ideas out there. There's a limitless array of articles. The problem is not really publishing more. We're already doing that. Is the issue sort of how do we get the most joy and passion out of our jobs? And it could be that that's the thing that we're going after, is just to make sure that we're joyful and passionate in the work that we do. Another possibility could be that we're out there to find out the most truthful answers we can get to, given the limitations of our tool, and find out what is actually the case. And so, like, Anne, you started out by talking about original research and that you were being evaluated based on the originality. And it's interesting, original is a pretty different criterion than getting it right.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. Well, your answer, part of your answer reminded me of the question, how do you verify the accuracy or the rightness of an answer given by ChatGPT or any other AI tools? So that's the question. I'll leave it at that. So Ash has a question that's interesting. He asked, where's the biggest disruption of generative AI? Is it in qualitative work or quantitative work? So Ash, where are you? Do you want to elaborate on your question slightly?
Yeah, very briefly, because we mentioned inductive work, and I think, in my perspective, correct me if I'm wrong, if GAI can do more deductive work, then is there a bigger role for qualitative research, for exploratory and explanatory parts of research? Or I don't know, I'd like to get the speaker's point of view on that.
I think from the perspective that it can process, that large language models can process text, there is a perception, at the very least, that it can have a very, very significant impact. So I think, like, I don't know if you've tried using any of the tools. Like I use Atlas, and in Atlas there is an OpenAI plugin, which it's really, really bad right now, but I'm sure it's going to become much more effective and much better. So you could actually assume that you could use such a model to analyze a lot of data for you. But what I was trying at least to say with my presentation was I'm concerned, what this means and where our role is, basically, because obviously we do interpretative research. We do not just process text. But as with all disruptions, the lure is there. And I'll leave it up to the audience, to consider what they think about that.
Well, when I think about quantitative research, it's very subjective when you decide what variables to include and exclude, what samples to include and exclude, what parameters and what are the missing data outline and so forth. It's a very subjective process. So try to imagine qualitative research subjectivity element is even bigger. So I have a hard time imagining how we can trust AI more than ourselves. Anyway, Mark David Sidal has a question about, where are you, Mark David? I'm going to let you explain your question.
Sure. I thank you for a wonderful panel, by the way. I just had a question, putting it in historical perspective, because a lot of the transitions we're seeing now strike me as quite similar to what happened in the 80s and 90s when statistical methods became widely available and people started being able to do it on a PC in the early 90s and just started playing with data freely and generating junk models, and p-hacking grew and all of that. And I'm just curious, there's definitely something different potentially here, or is it just an intensified version of that? I'm just curious what types of responsible research lessons we can actually draw.
Mark, that's a great question. If I can respond here, I think the label generative is a game changer in my humble opinion, because it means the production of knowledge on synthetic grounds, as opposed to something that has been collected in the real world. So if you go through multiple iterations of digital mediation, you end up with digital learning and digital education, or no, with synthetic learning and synthetic education. And that is thanks to the generative capability of the technology. We ever since humans exist, we have made use of technology, and we were parts of assemblages and what have you. But the fact that we have a technology at play that comes up with purely synthetic, or in some cases, or extreme cases, purely synthetic content, where you actually then use the synthetic content to train future models, that is a game changer. And that introduces degrees of abstraction from the real world, from the real physical experience, to a completely digitally mediated experience. Thank you.
Is it different than the stars in a table, though, Dirk? If you take a look at it, just the generated models that come out of basic regression models after they've been selected and refined, and it's basically just a predictive model as well, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a reason why we make a difference between predictive AI and generative AI. And I think that's an important point to keep in mind. Not just a historical prediction on past data that has been collected from the real world, in the real world. No, we have opportunity, well, am I using this term in tongue-in-cheek fashion, to move toward a completely synthetic kind of production, yeah.
Okay, we have 10 minutes. I want to save 5 minutes for the panel to offer their final piece of advice. So anyone else who has a question that desperately wanted it to be discussed, please raise your hand and somehow signal so we can call on you. Okay, Andrew.
I just wanted an explanation of, there was one example that Dirk mentioned about universal calculability. I forget what sentence he used it in, but I wasn't sure what that was to compare with what he was saying. So if you could go back to that point, Dirk.
You're on mute, Dirk.
You're muted.
There you go again. There you go again. No, I actually had it closed already. But what is meant by that is basically what Brian Cantwell Smith refers to reckoning. It's an ontological view of the world as being based on the formal rationality that is programmed and used and reflected in modern day computers. It is a world where, to use Weber's word, a world in which decisions are made without regard to people. This is what you get when you have a social system based entirely on the idea of formal rationality. So this is the background to that specific point.
Okay, thank you. Brett?
These conversations seem to have focused mostly on discussing concerns or potential concerns coming out from using generative AI for research, particularly for responsible research. But I wonder, considering that it seems like a flood that we can't really stop in some sense, are there positive ways we can use AI in your view? I mean, could it be a form of, even a basic form of research assistant, for example, in doing research? And I suppose in this sense, the question also leads to a broader question: what are the boundaries? In what way can we use generative AI for responsible research, and in what ways we shouldn't? Thank you.
Well, there's maybe a nice transition into your words of advice. So take that question as starting point and add any additional points you want to share. So we'll go one by one, okay? So who want to go first? Stella, Dirk, Jerry?
I had unmuted already to respond to
Okay.
to Ibrat, so so first of all, I must say, to me, using it as an assistant, it's really, really important. I'm really looking forward to it, to AI being a perfectly good assistant for all the admin and service tasks that will save me time from for immersing myself into what I'm more passionate about, which is research. So I think at the moment it's not awfully good at taking care of my calendar or filing my expense claims, etc. That would really save me a lot of time, and I think I could put into doing better research. But of course, I think as long as we are mindful of its capabilities and limitations, I do think that we can identify specific tasks in which it can become a perfectly good assistant. But at the same time, I really want to hope that we will continue having the human in the loop, basically, and we are using it consciously as an assistant, but to ensure that we have the time and space to use our own expertise, judgment, and interpretation while using it. And for people who have been, who are later, who are in more advanced, more senior stages, basically, of their careers, it could work really, really effectively. But I think when it comes to younger scholars who are now learning how to navigate all this, I think that the challenge is real, and it's not obviously what the impact on the newer generations. For me, it's a broader concern about all kinds of knowledge workers, because I see, for example, I do a little bit of research with law firms, and I see that most of the tasks that junior lawyers do, they're becoming automated. And the question is, how do we ensure that the future generations of lawyers will be able to develop their expertise? Similarly, how are we going to ensure that that the scholars of management and business will become experts enough. So, but for starters, my advice would be, there's no shortcuts to learning. Learning is definitely, it will evolve the way in which we train, but there's no shortcuts there. So taking the time to really learn to understand methods and develop your own views and trust your own views. I think that's, independent of what exactly theoretical field you're focusing on or methodologically, etc. The second, questions. We need to have a culture of inquiry. We need to question the sources. We need to question the models. We need to question and understand how those models came about. That's understanding what that means is important to inform how we use it in the interpretations and results and conclusions that can be produced about that. And then one last aspect, which I think is not only for junior scholars, it's for everyone. We should not conform to changes symbolically. If there is, when there's discussions about, hey, we can do this more efficiently, let's take a step back and unpack what this means and why and how that could be consequential in the longer term that we may not necessarily see now, in order to continue promoting what we think, the values that we think at least should underlie responsible research.
Okay, thank you, Stella. Okay, so Dirk, you want to go next?
Did you? I do it very quickly now. I do it very quickly. Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for this most stimulating event. Very, very briefly, my take-home message will be, it's more of a question. Do you want to own the knowledge production process from the beginning to the end? Do you want to own the narrative? It has knowledge implications, it has critical implications, but it also has something else, and that's really, really significant. It is, in a way, a refusal to engage in the act of cognitive offloading that sooner or later will impoverish our ability to learn and to adapt as informed social scientists. If you think this is hyperbole, actually read into recent research published on the decline of IQ levels in the general population. So there are some serious questions to be asked. I don't want to demonize the technology. I only want to make sure, for me personally, that I own the process of knowledge production, and where and if, under very defining circumstances, the technology can help me, I can look into it. But the ownership process is really, really of significant importance. Certainly. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Dirk. Jerry, please.
Yeah, no, thank you. This has been a great conversation, really super engaging, and all of the stuff going on in the chat feels like we're creating entirely new research communities being generated online, which is fantastic. Just a couple of points. Mark David sort of made a point that I would build on, which is that when statistical software got really easy to use, we thought we'd be doing better science. And when the Wharton Research Data Services managed to put together all in one place, one-click downloads of every public corporation in the US and their ESG scores and their financial accounting, we thought we were going to answer all the questions. It doesn't seem to have done that the way we would have liked. It's made it very, very easy to download a lot of data, analyze it very quickly, in an hour, but I don't think it's getting us more right hours. So there is something to, having to struggle and to dig into the details to be able to get this right. And I think we've seen some of the consequences of that. I did want to, because I'm morose and depressing, I did want to point to a slightly different direction. So we mostly talk about ChatGPT or some existing models, but of course there's going to be countless new models out there. I recently read about Martin Seligman's students creating a Martin Seligman bot, feeding all of his written texts into a model to train it to be a Marty bot. You can read the article that I posted here, where they created essentially a Martin Seligman bot that talked like him and reasoned like him. And if you pinged him, he would answer questions of the way that Martin Seligman is. Like, amazing. I would love to have Martin Seligman on my computer. I'd have a seminar with him. We could do certain really interesting conversations. To me, the danger is that we will have individualized professor bots that are available that talk just like us and sound just like us, but they've been tuned by Ron DeSantis's minions to avoid certain topics and to dwell on other topics. And I don't think we want to live in a world where that happens. The technology's out there for this to happen now, but I think this is one of the dangers to academic freedom. It's not just about the research part, it's also about the teaching part, where I think that the technologies create a real danger for us to be, if we want to worry about something new, that's the one that I think will happen most immediately, is cost pressures being used as a veil to press a model of education on the world that I think could be quite dark. So sorry for being morose and depressing. It's what I do best.
Well, Jerry, you're wonderful. So I would conclude by just a statement, simple statement. We are all researchers. We are social scientists. And I want to ask ourselves I'll remind ourselves that it is your research. It's your responsibility and your obligation to science and to society. And your reputation may be at stake if what you produce and write and publish is not your work, and in fact, is flawed work that you didn't bother to check and verify. So I'll leave it at that in the spirit of responsible research of business and management.